work, it was really anchored in, you were in that time working on the Relics at Home series. And I grew up in Southwest Minnesota in a small farming town, rural Minnesota, surrounded by families who were generation upon generation farmers. So your work in Relics of Home really struck me because I come from that type of environment, but you come at it from a very different perspective, which is one I think that most people, when they think of farmers in America, they don't think of the origins of the laborers who were slaves, who really got it started in this country in terms of farming. And so the work that you did with your grandfather's home and the pieces just absolutely spoke to me in a very different way. What do you want someone viewing that series to take away from the experience?
Sure. Well, thank you for appreciating that series, first and foremost. I think that when I first began exploring that space, that land, so this was all in Windsor, North Carolina. And I think that when I was first approaching it, I was really interested in the stories from the land. So I wanted to travel there to specifically visit the land itself, and the sites that were significant to my grandfather, but just significant sites to the family, like what happened in these places. And it's almost like I wanted the land to speak to me, like, tell me your history, tell me your story. And what I found was that even though I was most interested in the land and kind of like creating these portraits of the land and the stories that were told there, and really like the people were very, very secondary. The relatives were very secondary. I almost went and then, so my father and uncle were kind of showing me around and taking me to significant sites and showing me different homes and different sites of like burial grounds and a chapel, the fields, where they went fishing, how my grandfather or great grandfather got to school, like taking a canoe across a river, across the Roanoke River, right? Like, so all of these stories. So when they were telling me about these stories of the people, they started also to say like, oh yeah, we got to introduce you to your great aunt so-and-so and this third cousin over there. And I was like, ooh, I kind of don't want to do that, because I could be a little bit antisocial anyway. And it wasn't my focus, right? And I was there for a very limited amount of time with a specific purpose to capture the stories of this land. But then as I was shooting the land, I kind of was able to accomplish my goal of understanding the stories within the land. But that was like through this weird, like the atmospheric character of that space. So like it's the sky is hazy green and yellow and the kind of like, not overcast, but it's so bright that it feels overcast. Like the sun beats down on you and there's this like oppressive, heavy heat. And you just kind of feel like you're being strangled by like atmospheric instances, right? The size of the bugs that were flying like at the car, anything shiny at my camera while I'm trying to like take a portrait of these 8-foot tall weeds, right? And overgrowth of the fields, like was just, it strangled you. And so I think some of that comes through in the pictures and the color of the images. But then like the sense that something was off, something was missing, something like sick was happening, like it wasn't totally coming through. But then when I began to talk to the relatives, and the people whose lives were lived on that land, and hear the stories of their families who had passed and other ancestors, then I started being able to kind of piece these things together. And And that's where I kind of developed this new way of creating an image where the images were kind of like cut into and another image was placed on top, right? So there was this layering, trying to increase the complexities of the stories that were being told and the stories that I was hearing, and getting a little bit of that vibe into the images themselves. So I think that at the end of the day, what I want people to kind of get from the series is this sense of fragmentation, this interruption, and the complexities of these stories and the narratives of Black people in the country. It can't just be about the land and the history of the space. You can't divorce the people from the land, which I think is, it's interesting that I wanted to approach the series that way, because that is so much how capitalism, white supremacy approaches Black people and our contribution to the country, and the fact that it was literally built on our backs and with our hands and through our blood. So, so I think, you know, me kind of reconciling that, it was a journey for sure. And most of my work is a journey of personal reconciliation.
What do you see as your purpose as an artist?
That's an interesting question. I feel like I have been creating in some way for my whole life, whether that was through dance or theater or visual arts. My purpose, maybe from the beginning of creating to now, was just to be true to myself, and to somehow be vulnerable enough to share my truth and my ideas in the work that I create. That sharing my ideas, sharing perspective, helps somebody feel seen or helps somebody see things in a new way that hopefully make things better, right? Whatever that's, like a really broad kind of mission statement, kind of, you know, but I think at the end of the day, it's just about honesty and vulnerability. Yeah.
Admittedly, I have never seen your work in the physical space with the naked eye. I have always observed your work digitally. Sounds for Survival exhibit, you know, taps into the idea of water and taps into a character that I wasn't familiar with until I observed the exhibit, Yamaya. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah.
So the works interpret a call from Yamaya, who, from what I found, is the ocean god from the Yoruba religion, which was brought to the US in the 1600s through the African slave trade. What I see on your website does a really good job of giving me an experience with that exhibit. What was the inspiration behind that particular body of work?
That, I mean, really, that work is about, it's about healing and it's about reconciliation. And I think specifically it's reconciliation with generational trauma. I think it's like it's an alteration of one of the installations from the original installation of Relics of Home that was called Altar. It is right off of one of the roads that cuts through the fields in Windsor, North Carolina, where parts of the plantation were and where enslaved people, my ancestors, worked and labored. But so off of one of the roads, there's this patch of grass and then the woods. And so my uncle drove me there and was like, so we've got people buried here. I was like, be more specific, like, what are you talking about, you know? And so he explained to me that is a site where basically an unmarked burial site for ancestors and folks that labored in those fields. So I was pregnant and thinking about family. I was engaged and pregnant when I was kind of conceiving of the Relics of Home work. So I was constantly questioning like this idea of an origin story and feeling immense guilt that I did not know my story. I was thinking, like, what do I have to pass on to my child? Like, what is his legacy through me? It's just this fragmented, uh, unfinished, or maybe, without a beginning. It's like being a cut plant, like I just felt like I was rootless, and thought maybe I can go back and reattach to roots if they exist. Like, I'm sure they exist. Let me go and find these roots and reattach myself so that I can be whole and offer that wholeness to my child. For survival was kind of laying to rest this idea or this need to know the origin, to know the beginning. And to be attached or reattached to this idea of an origin story. And so it was, this Orisha Yamaya calling to her children, right? So Yamaya is like this motherly figure calling her children home. So I think that's like calling your children home, that speaks to me in a lot of ways, especially at that time, because what was happening in the world and in Minneapolis was that the city was on fire, right? Like, there was the pandemic happening, but George Floyd had just been murdered as well, and Minneapolis was burning. And I had just given birth to my second child within that time frame. So a mile from me, the city was burning. And when I went to the Mother Baby Center in Minneapolis to give birth to my youngest in the middle of a pandemic, we walked past National Guard. There's National Guard with, I don't know what kind of guns, I'm not a gun person, but like, I had never imagined that story would be, I walked past men with very large guns to have my child, right? Like, and I'm sure that this is the reality in a lot of places, in a lot of cultures, in a lot of countries, but that has not been the reality in this free place, right? So when I was making this work, like, it turned out to be this kind of like dual purpose of reconciling with the generational trauma, but also, trying to find a place to promote, to feel good, right? Like, to feel seen, maybe not good, but to feel seen. So I definitely wanted Black people to feel seen and warm and reflected and healed in the space if they were able to come through it and see that installation. That was important to me at the time, to just create a space of healing for Black people.
I find myself falling in love with the work more after I listen to you talk about what went into the creation of it. I mean, they can stand on their own. They don't need the narrative to be exceptional, but the narrative that you put to those works just makes it 10 times. Like, I can't wait to get back to your website, because I'm going to go check out Sounds for Survival again with a new appreciation for it. Your eulogy solo exhibit just wrapped up at Aspect Ratio Projects, a gallery in Chicago. Tell me about your experience on that side of the art world, where your work is in a space, you have potential investors / collectors coming forward, you have gallerists who want to help advance and represent what you're doing. What are your hopes or wishes for the choices that collectors make? Or is that at all a factor as you're creating your work? Do you think about the acquisition of what you create?
I didn't used to, but I think now I won't call it an afterthought, but it's definitely secondary. It's what comes into my mind as I'm completing a series and I'm like, okay, this is about to leave my studio, my hand, and be interpreted in all of the ways that it's about to be interpreted. And what does that look like? What does that feel like? Because then I start to create like the artist statements and kind of any materials that will accompany the work. I start to think about like what questions do I want to answer, if any, for the viewer. What's the overarching story that I feel is important to be considered when somebody's looking at the work. And so I usually don't go into a lot of detail. I'm like, this is inspired by references of this, that, and the other, right? Like it's kind of loose because I do think that it's important for people to be able to look at the work and see themselves or see whatever they want to see, because that's part of I think that's part of the healing nature of art in general, is like you kind of get to have reflected back to you whatever you need in the moment, whatever you need to see, whatever you need to understand. I feel like a lot of people have looked at the Relics of Home series that have not been Black, and they have seen their upbringing, in rural spaces, and that was necessary for whatever reason, right? Like that was healing and necessary to have those reflections. And so I'm glad that the work was able to do that as well. Everybody doesn't need to only hold on to my what drives me to make the work, but now I think that like the extent that I will go is like with like the consideration for a collector is like scale, right? Like so in some series I will consider scale, because like that is like, well, it's going to be hard for some collectors to collect like the 8-foot work, and and so sometimes in a series it's appropriate to have a variety of sizes, but then in other series like the one that I'm working on right now, it's not appropriate, and so that's either going to exist from just as a part of my portfolio, which I'm totally fine with, or a museum or institution that can carry and take care of large works might be interested in as well. So I think the last series, Eulogy, was interesting because it hit all points. There were the photographs that were 24 by 24 inches, which is like, large for a home, kind of, especially for a photograph, like large enough, it's substantial, but it's you can find a place for it in your home. And then there were these tiny, what I called artifacts, that were these like 2 by 2 inch, 1.5 inch deep, like resin pieces that you can hold, and that can sit on your desk, or you can make a little shelf on your wall and show that as a collected item as well. So I think that I have those conversations with myself close to the end when I'm wrapping up a series. And then when I know that I'm like thinking too much about it because it's like not my place, I call my gallerist and I'm like, okay, am I going too far with this? Like, can you sell this? What do you think of this body of work? And sometimes I think there will be cases where she takes some of the work and not all of the work. And I think that's okay too, because I need to make what I need to make. But in terms of communicating with and getting to know collectors, that's been like oddly, especially because I generally consider myself somewhat antisocial, like that's been really fulfilling. At specifically at the Eulogy opening, there was a woman where a piece spoke to her core, that she just came to me and she said, I have to meet you, and how do I buy this? how much is it gonna, like, how many limbs do I need to give you in order to have this work? And so, you know, in that case, I was like, I mean, if you want it, you can have it, and you can figure out the details of how that happens with the gallery. But like, just if it speaks to you that deeply, then you need to have it and like figure the rest out later. And so that is what we did. But she, you know, was brought to tears. And I never think that my work is going to do that. It's happened a couple of times. And I don't always know what to do with it, but it's like, dang, like that's what art's supposed to do, you know, like you are supposed to feel, you know, you're supposed to feel, it's supposed to touch something that you can't easily reach. The advice that I would give, or what I would want from a collector, is like, you know, especially like the work that I create, even though I work in, you know, photography, everything is unique. I don't do editions. So if you miss it, you miss it. Don't miss it. Like, see it, love it, buy it. Like, figure it out. Figure out the details of the how, you know, a little bit with the, I think that artists and galleries are usually willing to work with you. If you need that piece, like if it speaks to you, then like speak up about it. Don't feel like you can't be you can't be an art collector. Like, you know, like that's too beyond you. I love and have offered discounts to new collectors, you know, and payment plans and those kinds of things, because I've needed them too. For sure. I've needed those, like, can I give you 500 now? And then like 500 every month until I die to have that piece, please and thank you, you know. Right now, I'm creating my most ambitious series to date. It's called Nurturing and Other Rituals of Protection. And it is set to open at MIA in March of 2022. And because of the pandemic, I don't know if that date will, or that month will still be accurate. So, you know, kind of stay tuned for an actual date, but it is on the MIA website, so you can kind of follow things through there. But so that series is kind of my imagining of what I call scenarios of protection. And so there'll be pretty large scale photo-based images using the kind of cut and layering techniques that I've been working with in my last two series, that try to imagine like what protection, like what protected Blackness looks and feels like. So that will be an immersive installation space, some audio, and some photographic lens-based work as well, featured in that series. So I am like excited and nervous because it's super, like the scale of the work is really ambitious, and I don't totally have the right space to like execute it like easily, but you know, you fake it till you make it. So, probably Cuba, because we have family there and we don't get to see them often, but it's really nice when we can get the kiddos out there. They've all been really unique, but I can't say that I've had like a worst one, because I travel with no expectations. I expect nothing good to happen usually. Like, let's just see what goes down. So I don't have a worst. They're just, I approach them all with fresh eyes. I have a few. Simone Yvette Lee, Andrea Chung, Lorna Simpson.
I love Lorna Simpson.
Mm-hmm. We're awesome. Don't sleep on us. Buy our stuff.
Hell yeah.
I mean, hot take. Like, get it while you can. We're about to take over. Oh, Greece, I hope. maybe. Yeah, I've always wanted to go to Greece. Just buy it. What I mean by that is that you might look at a piece and think like, oh, this artist isn't very well known. I don't know if it's special enough. You know, if it's special to you, then go for it. I think that it's really important to surround yourself with things that you love and that that touch those parts of your soul that you don't have easy access to. So I would say go for it and don't worry too much about whether like the trajectory of the artist in their career and whether or not they're important. Get work that you love, and definitely always feel free to reach out to artists and say, I dig your work, I want to know more about you and your practice, where I can't name one person who wouldn't respond.